Hi, folks. Thank you for joining us for the last week of our candidate webinar series. Today, we are joined by Moms Rising um, and our communications manager at the School Funding Fairness Project, Noah, who will be presenting about equalized value per pupil. I'm going to quickly run through the format for anybody who hasn't been on these before. So in a minute or two, after we give folks an opportunity to join, um, Noah will give his presentation first, going until about 12:25. And then Mackenzie and Nancy from Moms Rising will both be presenting until about 12:45. As you have questions throughout these two presentations, please put them in the chat. And at 12:45, we'll move into Q&A. So I'll read the questions that you guys have put in the chat off to our presenters. This webinar is being recorded. Following this, later this afternoon, I will send around a link to a web page that will have both slide decks and the recording housed there. So keep an eye out for that. We have one more of these coming up later this week. Our final candidate webinar will be this Thursday, September 5th, same time at 12 with Reaching Higher. So yeah, thank you all for being here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Noah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. I'm going to get my screen up. All right. This is our second to last webinar. We've really enjoyed getting to speak with all of you running for office and get to work with all of these great organizations the last couple weeks. Really excited to hear from Moms Rising in a little bit. But today, I'm going to talk about equalized value per pupil, which we think is a statistic that helps explain a lot about how school funding in New Hampshire works. So if you've joined one of our webinars so far, you might have already seen this chart. So I'll go through it kind of quickly. So we're comparing two public high schools here. One of them has really high proficiency scores in math and reading. The other one does not. 97% of students graduate from high school A. In 4 years, 78% from high school B. When the Department of Education reports graduation rates, that's the 4-year graduation rate. 86% of students at public high school A who take AP tests score a 3 or above, which is what you need generally to get college credit. Only 39% from high school B. The average teacher at high school A is making $79,000 a year. The average teacher at high school B is making only $51,000 per year. The median household income in the community that of public high school A is more than double that of the community of high school B. And yet their education property tax rate, including the statewide education property tax, is $4 less per thousand. So these two places are Hanover and Claremont, separated by only about 30 miles on the road. And these are just the overall statistics that show a general picture of what these high schools are like. There's obviously students who succeed and do very well at Claremont, and students at Hanover High School who struggle and need more assistance. These are just the general overview of these two schools. But one of the stats that we haven't shown on this slide so far that really, I think, explains and gets at a lot of why these differences exist is equalized value per pupil. So what you can see here is Hanover's equalized value per pupil is over $3 million, and Claremont's is not even 1 million. So we're going to jump into what exactly this number is, how we get here, and what it tells us about school districts. But why is equalized value important to look at? So this pie chart shows the total revenue that was generated to support New Hampshire public schools during the 22-23 school year. Our state raised $3.8 billion in total revenue to support public education. The biggest piece of the pie is local property taxes. Local property taxes and SWEPT combined is 70.9% of all school funding. And we count swept as a local property tax because the money is collected and retained locally, and the state never actually touches any of it. So it is effectively a local property tax that the state is just taking credit for when it's reporting out its aid. You add up all of the money raised by local property taxpayers, it is $2.7 billion that the state should be contributing more of because of its constitutional responsibility to fund an adequate education. To look at it a different way, the green bar here shows what schools are actually spending to educate students, and the yellow and blue bars show how much state aid districts are receiving. So we have Claremont and Hanover over here on the right. You can see Claremont raises less than $100 per pupil from SWEPT, and then they get $4,800 from the state in adequacy aid. Excuse me. Hanover raises over $4,000 from SWEPT, still gets a little bit of adequacy aid. But in both cases, what those districts are actually spending to educate their students doesn't come close to what the state is providing in aid. And that's a problem because these districts have to make up this gap. All of these districts have to make up the gap between state funding and the actual cost of education. And that's why our heavy reliance on local property taxes can be a big issue. So let's talk about equalized value per pupil. This is a pretty basic fraction that we're working with, where we take the total equalized value of all taxable property in a community. When the Department of Education reports out this number, they use equalized value, including railroads and utilities, which are not covered under SWEPT. The equalized value is taking the total assessed property value that's assessed. The State Department of Revenue Administration has a formula to adjust for assessments happening at different times, sale values that are more up to date, to try and adjust for, let's say, I know Nashua just had an assessment last year or two ago, but there might be a community that hasn't had their assessment in 5 years, which it has to be done every 5 years. So the DRA does some math so that we can compare apples to apples, looking at property values that are all current. The bottom of the fraction is how many students live in a community. This number is ADMR, average daily membership in residence. So that's how many kids live in a community and are actually in their school building on any given day. Going back to Hanover and Claremont, here is what their equalized values per pupil look like. Hanover has over $3 billion of property value and a little over 1,000 students. Claremont has $1.3 million, $1 billion of property value and about 550 more students. But you can see that their local equalized value per pupil is less than a third of Hanover's. And because it's a fraction, it's a combination of factors. They have more students, so the denominator is bigger, and they have less property value, so the numerator is smaller, which means the number that we get is smaller. I'll point out that the reason the student numbers are decimals is because the DOE actually reports based on attendance, and as students move in and out, if they aren't there for the full year, they don't count for a full student. So that's why there's decimal numbers when we're counting students living in a community. Couple more examples, Portsmouth and Derry. You can see just how the combinations of different property values and student populations can impact equalized value per pupil. So why is equalized value per pupil helpful? We have 4 different districts here that have 4 different student bodies, 4 different numbers of enrolled students, 4 different property values. But what we're doing by putting them in this fraction is we are controlling for student population to get a better sense of how much money a community has at its disposal to support the students, each student in its school. So the way to think about it is Portsmouth has over $4 million in taxable property wealth for every single student in their school. Derry, meanwhile, has only about $1 million in taxable property wealth for every single student in their school. And so where that difference shows up as we try and close that gap between state funding and what we're actually spending on education is in the ability of districts to raise funds and to offer services to their students. And then just to show you the spread in equalized value per pupil, the lowest is in Charlestown, and the highest is in Newcastle. Their equalized value per pupil is over $25 million. Technically, Millfield is higher. Theirs is about $42 million, but they only have 2 students. Their ADMR was only 2.5. So I didn't include it because it's not a very useful example since they don't actually have their own elementary school. But we're going to talk general numbers for a second and sort of show how equalized value can tell us how hard or easy it might be for a community to raise funds for their school. So, excuse me. We have 2 imaginary communities here who are raising $10,000 for Chromebooks, let's say. They want to be able to give every high school student a Chromebook. Community A has $1 million in property wealth. They can set a $10 per thousand tax rate and raise $10,000. Easy peasy, they've got their Chromebooks. Community B, who has only 40% of the property value, if they set the same tax rate, they're only going to raise $4,000. Now, the Chromebook store does not care that they have less property wealth that they're working with to support their school. The Chromebooks still cost $10,000. So to actually raise enough money to get to that point, they need to set a tax rate 2.5 times higher than Community A to raise the same amount of money. And this is where property values, because we are relying on local property taxes for 70% of school funding, having lower property values can have a really negative impact on the things that you can offer to your students. We generally find that places with lower property values have higher tax rates and they're raising less money than places with higher property values. And so what this looks like, if we use the 4 towns that we had as an example a second ago, is a place like Portsmouth or Hanover is able to raise a lot of money pretty easily compared to Claremont or Derry. And in this instance, using equalized value per pupil, these are not real tax rates. They're relative tax rates. It shows us the relative ability of communities to raise money for their schools. And so if we do the same exercise as last time and try and show what it would take for everyone to raise the same amount of money, Portsmouth is set. And to get all of the other communities up to what Portsmouth raised, they have to have a much higher rate. Hanover, about 30% higher. Claremont and Derry, 4 and 5 times higher than Portsmouth, just to raise the same amount of money. And this is a hypothetical example, using Chromebooks, but where it can appear in any part of a school's budget, and it shows up in people's property tax bills. So looking at these 2 homes, I want you all to sit for a second and think, which of these homes do you think has a higher property tax bill? We pulled these from Zillow pretty recently. The one on the right, I'm realizing Portsmouth is in the property district description, which maybe gives it away a little bit. But these 2 homes are in Pembroke and Portsmouth. The home in Portsmouth is worth more than double the home in Pembroke, but its education property tax for 2004 is not double what's being paid in Pembroke. In fact, their rate is almost half of what it is in Pembroke. And if you want to look at why Portsmouth is able to have a lower property tax rate, because they have a higher equalized value per pupil. They have more money to support each student in their schools. And I put these out of order. I wanted to talk about this a second ago. we talked about Chromebooks, a nice round $10,000 as an easy example, just to show that the less property wealth you have, the more expensive it is for taxpayers to raise the money that's needed for all kinds of different things. It could be Chromebooks, it could be lab equipment. Let's say a district wanted to start a automotive technology course, through their careers and technical education program. Or teacher salaries. It's a lot easier to pay your teachers more when you have more property wealth that you're working with. On this chart, the state average is the yellow line, and the three communities we have: Concord on top, uh, Laconia, which follows the state average a little bit more closely, and then Franklin on the bottom. And then we have that's average salary, which includes differences in starting step, and if you have more tenured teachers, they're going to be paid more, which is why it's also helpful to look at starting salaries over here on the right side of the screen. Starting salaries can tell us what a district is able to pay a student right out of school. Someone who just got their teaching degree and is working on getting their certification in the state. And a place like Rye is paying over $51,000 for someone who just graduated with their bachelor's degree. A place like Pittsfield, with a lot lower equalized value per pupil, can only afford to pay $32,000 as a starting salary. There was an analysis done by our friends over at Reaching Higher, New Hampshire, who we'll be doing our webinar with on Thursday, that showed that for teachers in the lowest paying district in the state, you would have to work for 18 years to be making the same amount as the starting salary in the highest paying district in the state. And this is all really because communities that have more property wealth, it's much easier for them to pay their teachers. If we have our four towns that we had as an example earlier, Hanover, Claremont, Portsmouth, and Derry, and they all decided they needed to raise $1 million to give a raise to their teachers. It would be a lot easier ask on the Portsmouth and Hanover taxpayers to say, we need to raise $1 million. It's going to be a much smaller bump to their tax rate than it would be in Claremont or in Derry to raise an additional $1 million to give a raise to their teachers. And that leads to issues where, a place like Pittsfield that has a low starting salary, it's only about a 25-minute drive from Pittsfield to Concord High. If you taught at Pittsfield for a couple of years, wouldn't you drive 20 minutes down the road to make a lot more money at Concord High School? And it puts us in a position where we have much higher teacher turnover rates in communities with lower property values because they can't pay their teachers as much to hold on to them. And to put this into a bigger picture, we plotted out every single community in the state based on their equalized value per pupil. I'll note that there's 33 communities in the state that we didn't include them on the chart because it would have looked really silly. This stops at 6 million, and you'll remember Newcastle's equalized value per pupil is up over 25 million. But what we can see is that almost 3/4 of New Hampshire students live in the communities that have below average equalized value per pupil. That means 3/4 of New Hampshire students are going to schools that have more difficulty getting revenue to support the needs of students, and they're having access to fewer education opportunities in these districts. It's a lot harder to provide services to students and opportunities to students when it's difficult to raise that money for your schools. Now, there is a little bit of hope in this number, I think. I want to say that there's a small silver lining here before I hand it over to MomsRising. It would be really difficult if someone asked you to come up with a system that negatively impacted 3/4 of people living in the state on purpose. This is sort of an accident of the way the legislature has funded education since the Claremont decisions in the 1990s. But this big number, this 3/4 of Granite Staters living in communities with below average equalized value per pupil, that means there's a big coalition that can work to solve this problem. Those 130 towns that have below average equalized value per pupil, there are towns that always vote for Democrats and towns that always vote for Republicans and towns that go back and forth. There are big cities like Nashua and Manchester. There's small rural communities. There's every type of community in the entire state is represented in those 130 towns with below average property values. And that means that there should be the votes in the legislature to work to fix this issue. And that's why we're doing this, to educate all of you. And I'd encourage you all, you can find the equalized value per pupil statistics on the New Hampshire Department of Education website, see where your town falls. We have an interactive tool on our website, which I can try and find while Moms Rising is presenting, that shows you what the equalized value is in your community and in other communities around the state. And just see where you might fall on the scatter plot and think about what that might mean for how you would approach trying to fix this funding issue if you are elected to the state legislature. What sort of work has to be done for your community to be better off? So I'll leave it there. Put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll get to them after Moms Rising presents.
All right, I'm gonna turn it over to Mackenzie and Nancy. Oops.
Thank you. Everything look okay, Casey?
Yep, you are good to go.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Casey and Noah from New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project, for having Nancy and I from Moms Rising today. And thank you for joining us. No surprise after New Hampshire School Funding Fairnesses Project that you've all been tasked with fixing a major problem in our state, and we're here to keep it light with you today. So I'm really excited to chat with you all. And my name is Mackenzie Nicholson. I'm the Senior Director of Moms Rising in New Hampshire. I'm joined today by my colleagues Nancy and Lauren, and together we're really passionate about creating a state where all families can thrive. This is us. One thing that we definitely do is keep it fun and keep it engaging. This is our little team, and we're really excited to grow. And one of the new things that we're doing is testing you all at the end on which emoji is which person. So there will be a test at the end. I see so many of our friends in the chat. I see folks we don't know. I want to keep it interactive if we can. So while we get started, why don't we quickly in the chat say why you're running for office? Maybe keep it to a bullet point or a word, or what is important to you. One of the things that Moms Rising does really well is create relationships and create communities and understand the why. And I don't know, Nancy, if you could maybe see some of them, if maybe some brave souls are sharing their why while we maybe share our why.
Women's and maternal child health.
That's a good one. I like that. That sounds like a Moms Rising issue. Well, while you all are typing what your issue is, while you're running, why don't you get to know us? Nancy, what were you doing in 2017?
That's very specific.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say back in 2017, I was a volunteer, starting to make moves with Moms Rising and some of the other organizations in our state to be able to, lift my voice and other moms' voices, on some of the things that, we care about. I know that around this time we were talking about full day kindergarten, and we were talking about, paid family medical leave. And I was sharing my story all over the state on why is it that we need a paid family medical leave program that's comprehensive for all families to have access to in New Hampshire. And while I was doing it, I was trucking along my little guy, who is so little in this photo, but he's 12 now, and bringing him along for the ride, because with Moms Rising, we believe that, you bring your kids with you every opportunity that you have to be able to expose them to what advocacy looks like, then bring them into the fold, and we will create our little village to be able to take care of one another while we do it. So what were you doing in 2017, Kens?
Well, Such an interesting question. Such an actually, that little boy next to you is my oldest, and we're in the governor's office. I'm also a volunteer for Moms Rising in 2017, and my youngest, who is in an infant carrier there, is now 7. And my mentor, and her name's Christina, the woman who used to actually sit in this role, she told me to wear my baby into that governor's office while I told him how hard it was to be a mom. And that was something that I had been doing for quite a few years as a mom who became a mom really young and was advocating for policies like paid family leave, and I didn't have them myself. So I found myself in front of Congress talking about the need for paid family leave, the need for to support young families as they begin to grow. And our little people have grown up together and become great friends, which I'm so thankful for. And my oldest is now 11, and they've seen us on this journey, and I hope that they become like us someday. That's like one of my hopes and dreams.
I would say on our end for sure. I have a son that experiences a disability, and he has accommodations at school. And at 12 years old, he's running his own meetings with his teachers. He's making sure that all of the things that are supposed to be taken care of in his 504 plan are being taken care of. He's reporting back to me. We have a system set up as to how we go about this. So advocacy is definitely something that was learned along the way. I also wanted to point out, Ken's in the chat, we have a few other folks who have shared. We have someone that says that they're running to be a voice to protect and expand public schools, children, and to protect reproductive freedoms. No vouchers. And raising funding for public education. This will have an enormous impact on improving economic opportunities for all families. Equitable education funding. Um, and then there are some questions. There's a question in here too.
We'll get to the questions at the
Yeah,
end after both of the presentations.
yeah, that's what I figured. So, but yeah,
Thank
there's some of the other options that were in here that I wanted to make sure were raised.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing your story. I can't see the chat, so I appreciate you reading them out loud to me, Nance. So let's keep that lively discussion going in the chat. If you know us, or if you don't know us, maybe drop one word about what Moms Rising is, and it can be just complete the sentence. So my sort of elevator pitch, if you will, this is Moms Rising. These lovely human beings are Moms Rising. Moms Rising is an on-the-ground and online grassroots organization of over 1 million moms and their families across the country working to achieve economic security for all moms, women, and families in the United States, including thousands of moms right here in New Hampshire. We're a community of moms, families, everyone who's ever had a mom or loved a mom or had a belly button, who come together to share ideas about how we can change our communities for the better, make New Hampshire the best place for our kids and our families. And we do this through really deep relationship and skill building. This picture is like a small slice of the pie of what we do. One of the things that we do, which I know we do really well, is our fellowship program. I wonder, Nancy, if you could tell folks about what our fellowship program looks like.
Yeah, that's one small part. The fellowship program, we've been running a fellowship roughly around 10 to 12 moms in the state. Pretty much since like 2018, 2019 was when we had started them. We do in person as well as virtual, where we do some leadership skill building. We talk about, what our stories are, how important our voices are, and, we provide some education on how to be able to use that while also creating community. I want to say that's probably the biggest piece of the pie that Moms Rising is a part of, is we're all about building community, because it takes a village to raise children. It takes a village and a community to be able to change the policies that we need. And so we create a safe space for moms and families to be able to come in and learn a little bit about how they could use their voices, the variety of different ways they can do it in a space where they're comfortable, and in a way that they also feel comfortable sharing their stories and how they feel comfortable advocating personally. We have folks that come in that are, more comfortable with writing. And so they like to write LTEs and op-eds, and they like to write their testimony out and share. We have some folks that like to be behind a podium, and they want to be there to share their story loud and proud in front of a large group of people. We also have some of our members that are supporters. You know, they help to drive people, provide transportation for some of our other members, as well as watching kids, because we know that testifying at the State House is not an easy thing when you have children. So we often will have supporters that will be there too, to be able to help our members be able to wrangle their children while they're also trying to share their stories to be able to create meaningful change in our state. And so our fellowship programs, they're roughly about 10 months long. We do one session a month usually, and we go over all of the different things with community organizing and ensuring that we have equitable policies that are being introduced into the legislature.
Yes, community and safe space. I loved hearing those words. We're a safe space, and you know, our moms don't just show up, they also bring you fresh eggs. And that's real. Many of our moms have gone on to work in advocacy too. And with the third largest legislature in the world, something that many of you are trying to be a part of, some of our moms even run for office, and we're super excited to see some of them here today. So again, Moms Rising, we're a community of moms, we're people. We are just people, Granite Staters like you, who are living in New Hampshire, experiencing life. So what are the moms saying? Corey here says, we pay more for our daughter's preschool program than we do for our mortgage. We've been on wait lists for other daycares for years now. Others won't answer or return our calls because they don't need the business. And we live in a childcare desert. And Corey's story isn't out of the norm. In fact, one of our policy priorities is early care and education, where we're hoping to expand access to affordable, quality, affordable early care and education. Going back to Corey's thought here, Nancy, you chat so much with all of our moms. Childcare seems to be like the number one thing that you're hearing. Any other top line thoughts?
In regards to childcare?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a real situation where a preschool program is more than a mortgage. If you have multiple kids that you need to have in care, that's a whole other level that, you know, is forcing so many moms out of the workforce. And a lot of our members, that's what ends up happening, is we have a lot of members that come in that were on their way working towards an amazing career, and then they find out that they can't afford to continue to work and be able to care for their children. So they end up leaving the workforce, and we have amazing, talented women that are leaving, you know, with degrees, with all of these, you know, talents that are not being used because they can't access childcare. Not because they don't want to, but because it's just financially impossible for them to be able to do it. So I know that that's a really big story there, as well as, you know, we talk about, like I said, multiple children, but even if you have a kiddo that's right on the cusp of a birthday, you can, that's a difference between spending, you know, your money on childcare for an extra year, just because your kiddo was born in a certain time of the year that just doesn't make sense. So we've been working really hard on making sure that those mom voices are being heard in Concord, and as well as with our state departments as well, to be able to hear what it is that moms really need to be able to do this, which is one of the things that we worked on was the Child Care for Working Families Act, to be able to, you know, help alleviate some of the stress that's being all around childcare, because truthfully, it's only one part of it. It's all systemic. So there's many, many pieces that need to be going in to be able to ensure that childcare truly does become accessible, equitable, and affordable.
Yes, we are making progress, and I am seeing childcare in the news more than ever in my entire life right now. And with the passage of that large package we passed last year, changes on the horizon, and we're really excited for some of the future changes that we'll be working on in collaboration with some of our moms. One of our other policy priorities, which you'll hear us talk a lot about, is maternal health. Excuse me, where we hope to address maternal mortality, specifically the crisis in Black maternal health. Allie from Glenn has a quote here. I wish I could consider becoming a mom, but no maternity leave or paid leave for new moms is completely prohibiting me from being able to start a family. Plus, the astronomical cost to use a hospital to give birth will keep me from getting pregnant. In the USA, puppies are required to stay with their dog mom for 6 weeks before becoming separated because it is humane. I wish we could spare that same amount of humanity for human babies and moms. I wish I could become a mom, but I think I would become a fool in poverty if I actually tried parenthood here in the USA. Makes me want to like face palm and cry right here. We're facing some serious challenges in the maternal health space in New Hampshire. We have lost is it 9 or 11? I always get this number mixed up, but 9 and 11, we've lost 11 maternity wards in 20 years. That's what it is. Frisbee Memorial Hospital was the latest. And the United States is the most dangerous place to give birth in the developed world, where Black women die at 3 to 4 times the rate of their white counterparts. And we know that 80% of maternal health, maternal deaths are preventable. That is straight from the CDC. So
And the number one cause is perinatal mental health. Actually, when you take into account overdose and suicide.
thank you, Representative Beauchemin.
Sorry, just one.
That's all good. No, it's good to have friends here and good to have affirming voices who know the challenges as well as we do.
And
So
yeah, I wanted to just say really quick to build off of that. You know, I know that, you know, we're talking about mental health, especially maternal mental health. That was something that Representative Buscema just brought up. And so acknowledging that, you know, one of the things that we had heard were that we had a lot of moms in our state that utilized state Medicaid that didn't have access to insurance after they gave birth for only a short period of time. So to know that you could have access to maternal mental health treatment and things like that, that's personally my story when it comes down to being able to access maternal mental health and not having insurance to be able to help with some of those postpartum pieces, as well as if you have a loss of a child or anything like that too.
thank you. Thanks for sharing that. One of the other pillars of our work is workplace justice, and we lovingly call ourselves the Justice League, but we're fighting for things like equal pay, paid family and medical leave, paid sick days, breastfeeding rights, and other workplace justice policies. Holly from Goffstown here says, with the rising food prices, there were weeks where I would skip a meal or two just to make sure there's enough food for everyone else. Having WIC makes it so we can all eat and I don't have to pretend I ate when I didn't. So that being said, we kind of leave this last section here open-ended because moms are whole people, our families are whole people, and we're flexible. We have to be flexible to meet the rising needs of families and moms. And so, yeah, sometimes we work on hunger. More often than not, we're setting the floor in our work in disability justice, racial justice, LGBTQIA plus justice. Moms are multi-issue people. Isn't that right, Nancy?
Yeah, our policy priorities often come from the voices of our moms that we talk to. So, yes, there was a maternal health as well as workplace justice and childcare are all pieces of what we work on. But ultimately, when our moms come to us with an issue that is impacting them and a variety of families, then we make sure to do everything we can to support them, to be able to continue to use their voices and to be able to make those changes possible.
It's pretty awesome doing what we do. Plus, who knew moms and people who love moms are voters? And they have some opinions about these issues. I won't read these out loud to you. I know you can do it yourself. One of them that I think is really interesting and may be a precursor to some of the work that we do this year, hint, hint, wink, wink, in this maternal health section box. Representative Boschman, 84% support improving maternal health data collection and research. 85% include support expanding the number of providers trained in maternal health. Just saying. Moms are voters. Moms have opinions. Let's hear from our moms about why they vote.
I want it to be known that I care about not only myself and what my family needs, but also the community around me. And that was something at 18 that I did not understand. And once I had children, or even once I was involved in the school systems as well, you know, seeing that not all families are like mine and people depend on services and needs. And like I said, until I needed those things, that's when I really understood how important it is. And by voting, you can help and you can make a difference in the lives of other people as well. So I just wanted to add that to make it a little bit more community based is also a reason why I vote.
Lauren with her baby on her hip, and Katie.
Hi, my name is Katie, and I live in Hanover, New Hampshire. I am so excited to cast my ballot in what is becoming the most crucial election of my lifetime. I can't wait to vote to move things forward because I can't imagine a world where my daughter has less reproductive rights and choice than I've had. My vote is how I fight for her future.
I want to come back to this actually for a second, because these are not just mom's issues, right? These are all of us issues. And now that we've heard from Katie and Lauren, I'm just sitting here thinking like, wow, these are not just winning issues. But by aligning with these priorities, you're not only supporting families, but you're connecting to the values of your constituents, right? The people who elect you. 81% of parents feel more favorable about a candidate who supports increased funding for childcare. It just makes sense. I don't know. Nancy, do you have any final thoughts? Lauren, I see you too. Just in case you need anything, feel free to drop it in the chat, or if you have thoughts. Like, that being said, we're here to be a resource and a partner. And Nancy, I'll let you chime in a second. We want to make New Hampshire the best place to work and raise a family for all of our families. We're eager to work with you. We thrive off of building relationship and having open conversation and community together. And we're always open to build a relationship and get coffee and work together.
And the moms and the members that we work with are also eager to be able to speak with people that will truly listen and be able to hear what are the things that are affecting their families as well as other families in New Hampshire. And they're willing to work together with you to be able to figure out a way to be able to make this truly an equitable place for families to be able to raise their children in. That's all I got.
I was just realizing too, one thing we didn't chat about, which is sort of an up and coming, is if you become a legislator or any elected official at any level of office, we'd invite you to join our Moms Caucus, which is a caucus of moms and people who care about moms at every level of office. Last year, we were not very active, so we are very excited and very hopeful this year to be thriving and screaming from the rooftops about the Moms Caucus. But we'd love to have you join us in that, no matter where you are.
And similar to how we operate at Moms Rising, Moms Caucus is also one of those safe spaces to be able to come in and interact with other moms and people that love moms on some of the policies and some of the things that are affecting folks on a local and state level. And so it's a great way to be able to bring folks together and also, you know, learn from each other because, you know, moms in office, they make a difference.
We're super grateful to be here today. I'm going to leave my email on the screen if you need to get in touch with us. Nancy and I are an email or a text or a coffee away. But please reach out to us, and we're so excited to hear from you. And thank you again for running for office. At the pay rate, we couldn't afford you. So
Great. Thank you, Mackenzie and Nancy. I've got a couple of questions for everyone. So we'll start with the handful of questions that came through for Moms Rising. First, could you we had in the chat from Paige wondering how folks can join the Moms Caucus.
that is a great question. Reach out to me or Nancy and we'll get you connected.
Great. And can you provide us with some ideas of what the state can do to help with childcare access?
So many great things. What could we do? Okay. So really quick childcare primer. I'm gonna try not to word vomit at you. Childcare system as a whole is kind of a market failure. If you remember your high school economics class, right? Where there's supply, demand, those two things right now are climbing, right? Supply, or rather, supply is dropping, demand is climbing, and they're, ooh, hello. I have multiple screens, apologies. So when there is no floor set, there's no investment in that system, the supply is required to meet the demand. That means that in real talk, New Hampshire isn't investing into childcare a ton. Now, we have passed some legislation recently that did put some $15 million into workforce recruitment and retention. Those grants in that program is slowly getting out into the field. We last year passed a package of childcare subsidy reforms to help families be able to afford childcare, and for providers, frankly, to be able to afford to provide the childcare. Alas, we still have to pay people to work in the field, and there isn't a statewide or frankly federal investment to kind of set the floor and make it so that families are not paying the cost of childcare. So some of the things that New Hampshire could do would be invest, put some money into childcare, and whether that means that we again, we're like setting a floor for wages or funding insurance or figuring out a way to make sure, like we're working on this right now through a pilot that we are just passing, that childcare providers don't have to pay to send their kids to childcare, to make sure that there's a workforce, a supply there. Some of the other things that we could do is make it easier for families to start childcare. Actually, Nancy, you talk to a lot of moms. A lot of moms are like trying to figure out what they could do. How can we support family childcares? How can we support moms in figuring out the childcare crisis? I think that's something that we could do too. We could talk about.
Another piece of it, and actually, Maxine, you hit the nail on the head on another thing, which is care for children with disabilities and having training available to support those caretakers. Absolutely. That was my story. I couldn't send my son to a traditional childcare, so I had to adjust my working hours to be able to be there for him. And I wouldn't be able to be doing the things right now if I wasn't able to figure something out. But another thing too is, access to those subsidies. New Hampshire easy isn't that easy. So a lot of times when we have families that are going to apply for any kind of assistance, there's a lot of barriers in their way. There's a lot of regulations, a lot of paperwork. And it's been known that if a family is denied the subsidy a first time, they're less likely to try again, even when we have things like policy changes in the legislature to support them. So another thing that we could be doing even more of is communication, making sure that families are aware that these are things that they can access. And so again, investing money, being able to move some of those communications around so parents can do that, making New Hampshire easy, just a little bit easier. That would be phenomenal too. And really meeting parents where they're at, so then they can be able to access all of the different services we do have in New Hampshire.
Could the two of you talk a little bit about some of your previous legislative wins, just to kind of give a sense of what legislative solutions for the issues that you guys have outlined have looked like in the past?
Definitely. So 2023, we had quite a year. We talked about two of those pieces of legislation already today. One was the Child Care for Working Families Act, which was an omnibus piece of legislation that I mentioned that passed some sweeping changes to the subsidy program, put some investment dollars into workforce recruitment and retention for childcare workers. That legislation passed in 2023. The implementation of that is ongoing. We also passed the Momnibus, which was a maternal health omnibus bill that expanded postpartum coverage for Medicaid up to 1 year, because previously it was only covering moms 60 days postpartum. It did a number of other things, including begin to start the process of allowing us to bill doulas and midwives through doulas and lactation service providers, through Medicaid. Trying to get back some access to moms to some of those very important maternal health care providers. This year was a bit of a different year. We weren't going, this isn't a budget year, right? And so during a budget year is a different type of year that, you're not passing as expensive bills. But we did pass a pilot program on making sure that childcare providers could send their kids to childcare for free. We also passed a bill to require health insurance companies to cover 6 rounds of IUI per plan year, to try to make some equity, to give some equity back into reproductive health care for some of our LGBTQIA plus families. I'm trying to think, Nancy, what else did we win this year? I'm having an absolute brain fart right now.
No, I was actually going to build off of some of the things. I know that the Momnibus bill was an amazing piece of legislation to get passed. I want to kind of mention a couple of other things that were in that were really important. And some of the things that we're working on still, access to visiting nurses, as well as doula coverage, because some folks, they should be able to choose whether or not they want to have a doula or they want to be able to give birth in, a traditional medical setting. Another thing was, like I said, expanding that Medicaid for moms postpartum up to a year, which is huge, because when you know that your healthcare is going to get, cut off after only 8 to 12 weeks, then you can't, how can you make those plans? And we know that postpartum and things like that, and also complications can happen long after. So that was another thing that we had worked on to be able to do, as well as donor milk is another big piece, and access to breastfeeding in the workplace. These are all things that, matter to families, matter to moms. It's about feeding our children. Come on, let's feed our children. And so those are some of the things that we worked on too, that I wanted to just lift up some of the details within some of that legislation, because once you start to break out the little pieces of these omnibus bills, you actually see what the impact can be. And then we're also still working on some of those maternal health pieces, as well as some of those early childhood legislation as well.
Yes, and to Maxine's point earlier, I was just remembering that this year we also passed a bill to include a disability differential in our child care scholarship program. So kiddos with identified extra needs, there will be a bump in the amount that the child care provider receives to try to offset some of the costs, and frankly, some of the, shifting of other kids to other classrooms to manage behaviors. So that's something that we also worked on this year. We have so many things that we could be working on, because there's a lot to do, as so many of you pointed out.
And actually, I'm taking a look at the chat too and seeing things that are coming up. And when we're talking about home-centered child cares, family, friend, and neighbor care, that's a real thing, right? I know, especially folks that work non-traditional hours, being able to access childcare that way. So there's a lot of creative ways that we could be able to support families, when it comes down to childcare. But that family, friend, and neighbor care also brings a level of equity to our families as well. We have some immigrant families that, they want their children to have those cultural values, and being able to know that a subsidy can go towards a child care center that would be able to help them be able to access that. That's huge, for them to be able to do too.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both for your wonderful answers. I'm going to move on to two quick questions for Noah before we wrap up. Noah, can you talk a little bit about what variables impact equalized value per pupil and why some are so much higher than others?
Yeah. So obviously, there's two parts of the fraction. You have the student population, which we're going to assume is going to change a little bit every year, but that's not going to be a big driver in changes to equalized value per pupil. Really, the biggest thing, let's say a community is trying to increase their property values. There's a lot of different ways they can do that. Something that we see generally you'll remember that Newcastle had the highest equalized value per pupil in the state. Places like Moulton Borough, Portsmouth, Wolfboro, Waterville Valley, they all have very high equalized value per pupil. They have valuable natural resources that they are next to. So unfortunately, Derry can't pick up and go, restart next to the beach and have an increase to their property values that way. Another big factor can be, the amount of commercial property that exists in a community. Commercial property is often pretty high value and does not have any students attached to it, which can really help take the tax burden off of homeowners. Also, just building new property in general, it's obviously, local zoning decisions impact the ability of development in different communities. But I think there's a pretty big misconception that exists in New Hampshire that if you build new housing, it's going to totally blow up the school budget. And that's just not true. Let's say you build a new home, property value of $500,000 that now exists in the town that didn't before. And even if 2 kids live there, your equalized value per pupil is still going up by an additional 200, or there's a lot more property value going in than the cost of educating those students. And, adding 1 or 2 students or even 25 students with like a new development of housing is not going to lead to drastically larger expenses for a school district unless all of those kids happen to be first graders, in which case you need to hire a new first grade teacher. But because there's already existing infrastructures in schools, a new student does not cost a lot more money for a district to add. So the biggest thing is the overall property wealth in a community. And one of those big factors of new development, commercial property, and really the biggest one is, are you next to a lake or an ocean?
And where would New Hampshire get more money other than other than an income or sales tax? Lois pointed out in the chat that if business taxes are brought back to a reasonable level, businesses would likely just pass it on to consumers.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of options. Business taxes are generally borne by the consumer, but as Representative Almy pointed out in the chat earlier, the biggest payers of the business profits tax are such huge companies that they also might not. There was a study that the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute did last year on the business profits tax, and they found there were 78 corporations that paid more than $1 million in business profits tax. And then by the same coin, there were 65,000 businesses, small local businesses in New Hampshire, that together paid 2.2 million in business profits taxes. Walmart and Home Depot are probably not going to significantly raise their prices just because they have to pay an additional 1% on their business profits tax rate. This report, which I'll let me put this in the chat for people to read because it's pretty interesting. 58% of filers of the business profits tax are multinational corporations. So cost probably will be passed on to consumers, but I think that's an important thing to remember is like we talk a lot about property and communities, but it's still people paying taxes. People pay property taxes. And I think what's important to remember is our schools don't necessarily need more money. We just need to shuffle around where it is. There are places that are really underfunded in our state, and it's about increasing the total state revenue as opposed to all of the money being raised. So some of the other options besides the business profits tax would be reinstituting the interest and dividends tax. That would raise, if we just put it back in as it was in law before, it would raise around $130 million a year. That tax is not paid by over 85% of Granite State households. Over 85% of Granite Staters pay nothing in the interest and dividends tax. We could have a capital gains tax, on, well, we could have, inheritance taxes. We could have a true swept where I said before, swept is collected and retained locally. If the state actually collected swept and paid it back out, that would have a pretty significant impact on most people's property tax rates, lowering them. I have it written down here that if we set a swept rate of about $5 per thousand, we would be able to increase base adequacy funding to $7,356, which is the number that the Superior Court put forward in its Conval decision. So there's a lot of options to increase state revenue. The money's already being paid by taxpayers around the state. Really, the job of the legislature is to be having a conversation about who should be paying and where the money should be coming from.
Thank you, Noah. All right, we are at 1 o'clock. So I would like to say thank you very much to Mackenzie and Nancy for joining us today. And thanks for all of you for continuing to participate in these. It's been awesome to have folks so active in the chat today. Final reminder that our last one of these webinars will be Thursday, September 5th with Reaching Higher. And Mackenzie, Nancy, and Noah, if you have any final words to say to our participants here, I will pass it over to you before we close this out.
I do not. Thank you all for joining us. Please get in touch with Mackenzie and Nancy to be a part of the great work that they're doing. And we hope to see you again on Thursday.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.